The premier's stuck between a rock and a hard place, so she's used the bait and switch right from the get-go when you are elected as leader based on a sovereignty act, and then the sovereignty act says a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. There's a lot of people who said, no, that's not what we wanted. And, Rob Smith was on, the president of the UCP was on this morning on an interview, and he said over 50% of the UCP membership want an independent Alberta.
This episode of Bring Back the Porch, brought to you by Bernie Leahy, River Street Realty. Let's get you home. And joining me again on the porch is Jim Groom, political scientist, retired or just retired from the college.
Yeah, it's a bit of everything there, isn't it?
You don't ever retire being a political scientist because you're always watching.
That's very true. Yeah, I like to keep my finger in the pie a little bit and see what's up. It's always interesting, and it affects everything we do every day, all the day.
And there was lots to watch on the weekend from the UCP convention. I mean, we had a Prime Minister of Canada being cheered.
Mm-hmm. Not by the UCP convention, no, for sure. Right?
And then the UCP body booing their own leader. Yeah. So let's kind of dive in. Where do you want to start? Do you want to start with the reception that Mark Carney received when he signed that pro-pipeline memorandum with the Premier?
Yes, well, it's kind of nice to see a Liberal Prime Minister get some acknowledgement for his some efforts. I don't think that Carney is particularly political. I think he's more of a technocrat. And I think he's cut through some of the politics because there's just no political advantage for him for doing an MOU with Alberta to get to the coast. It just doesn't, even within his own party, as we see, Gail Bell resigned right away, the minister. And, to a certain extent, Alberta had vilified him as it was because of he represented the Trudeau greenwash type of an aspect. And I think that probably is symbolic to a big change in the party. But the big part of the party is also environmentally sound and wants that environmental profile to be responsible for the future. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. Now, of course, Carney has until his mandate runs out with a minority government. So he can play fast and furious with the chips if he wants to. But there's 20 MPs, Liberal MPs in BC. There's 2 in Alberta. The political calculations didn't make very much sense. But it's nice for him to get that acknowledgement that he is business oriented and we're open for business type of an aspect, and that we're progressing. And that was his objective, I think, when he came in, when he was elected, was let's get us moving again, and all that's starting.
It was interesting that Danielle Smith, when she was speaking to the convention after that memorandum had been signed, she didn't mention it in her remarks, I guess, until somebody brought it up about 35 minutes into her address. And then when she did, that's when the booze came out.
Yeah, stuck between a rock and a hard place. So she's used the bait and switch right from the get-go when you are elected as leader based on a sovereignty act, and then the sovereignty act says a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. There's a lot of people who said, no, that's not what we wanted. And, Rob Smith was on, the president of the UCP was on this morning on an interview, and he said over 50% of the UCP membership want an independent Alberta. It's they bandied about 30% and 40%, but he literally said over 50% want an independent Alberta in the party itself. So here's Danielle Smith negotiating with Ottawa, which is the last thing that group of people want, and they reject her position, absolutely. And for many, many years, she's been able to kind of hold out that, well, I really am on your side, but I also have to be a nationalist because, the Forever Canada petition got 450,000 signatures. So here she is with the prospect of getting another government based not on the position of her party, but based on appeasing Albertans. And how does she do that? How does she balance that off when you have over 50% of your party wants independence, and you have huge numbers of people in the electorate generally who say no, we aren't interested in independence? How do you win the next election based on those kind of numbers?
So do we hear the fissures beginning to crack in the UCP party?
I think there's something has to give. Either they have to unify under another name or title, or they find a leader that is pro-separatist, and they simply become a separatist party, and that becomes their raison d'etre, as it were. That's what they need to do.
So then we will be dividing the right after uniting the right. So
exactly.
Back where we were.
You know, it was always a shotgun wedding at the best.
Mm-hmm.
And progressive conservatives have often said, well, the Wild Rosers have just simply taken over. And even the extreme sides, the Take Back Alberta side of the Wild Rosers, have taken that over. And it's just moved so far to the right. And there is a recognition within the party that they want power, just like every other political party, and they aren't going to get it from the general electorate by having the policies that they've been pursuing at this stage, I don't think.
The recalls of several UCP MLAs also playing into the dynamic here. And now I hear that maybe they're going to change the legislation so that won't happen.
Yeah, it would be pretty contentious to do that, obviously, you know, and you'd have to do it retroactive in some way, shape, or form, and that becomes like what value of any of the laws that we have if you simply change it when you don't like it. Now, Bible Bill Eberhard did that back in 1937, where he was going to be, impeached as well, sort of thing, and they finally simply said, well, we'll just do away with the legislation. And of course, Eberhard passed away before the next real election, but the social credit went on to win until 1972 or something, before the Liberals came in, and then the Progressive Conservatives came in. So it didn't seem to do them any damage, and that's one of the problems in Alberta is we are so stridently right of center that the right of center party is going to be supported. It seems like, no matter what you do.
What do you think Naheed Nenshi's thinking and feeling about all of this that's happening with the government?
Well, he's in a tough position because if he comes out against the MOU or something of that nature, well, there's a lot of Albertans who want that pipeline, and it's fundamental to Canada. It's fundamental to Alberta's economy. So he can't object to that. But he can't also put his finger in the pie of the recall legislations, as an example, because that's definitely interference, and that's, would be seen as inappropriate, but it would also be an exploitation of a weak position. And I think he doesn't want to be seen as picking up the bones sort of thing in that regard. So I think he has to take a real balanced approach. Now, one of the criticisms of Nenshi lately is that, he's finally starting to talk. It's taken him a long time to find his footing and to actually come forward and have some issues. And, of course, the teacher strike was one of the big ones that galvanized the population. It also galvanized his party and, I think, his leadership. And, they tried their best, and by limiting debate to an hour per each stage of the legislation, it made it pretty difficult to do much of a job in opposition. And that's just a travesty of our democracy when it's abused that way.
And the use of the notwithstanding clause, not once, but several times.
Proactively.
Sure.
Yeah,
yes.
Preemptively, I should say. Yeah, it's just unheard of. Quebec did that, of course, because they didn't sign the Constitution in 1982, and they blamed the Night of the Long Knives and all these sort of things. But, René Lévesque was a separatist premier, and he was tempted to sign the document, and then his advisor said, we're a separatist government. We're supposed to part from Canada, not sign on to the agreement of it with the Constitution. And so, of course, they had to then disavow. And up till 1985, every piece of legislation included a notwithstanding clause. But that's such a different situation than what we find here, of course. And this is, I think, if they'd used the notwithstanding clause, forced the teachers back to work, but then went to a mandatory arbitration, I think they would have at least saved some respect for themselves, because they simply said, well, you disagreed by 90% for this last contract, but that's what we're going to impose upon you. And it just seemed like it was way too self-serving.
Premier Smith did say that her government will not cooperate with Ottawa in the gun buyback legislation. I don't know if that's sort of throwing her right flank a bone or not.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I mean, after she made her comments or somewhere in that context about the pipeline and supporting Ottawa and collaborating with Ottawa and getting the booze, all of a sudden the red meat came out, and it was, all these things, folks. We're going to ban books. We're going to make sure that we have parental involvement in education, our own police force. They dragged that all out again. And one of the things that was very popular, of course, is the ignoring the federal rules on firearms, the changes that they've made. That piece of legislation federally has been a debacle right from the get-go. The original minister that was handling it mishandled it quite badly. And, of course, at the 11th hour, they started adding more and more firearms to it, and it became, even the Liberals didn't really want to support it very much. But this is really going to be a very direct confrontation between the two. And, the typical approach is, of course, Alberta would put legislation avoiding following the firearms regulations. And then it would go through the courts. And, of course, the Supreme Court eventually would say, well, this is federal jurisdiction. And then they would invoke the notwithstanding clause. So it will be interesting to see if they simply jump to the chase and say, well, we're going to put the notwithstanding clause in place, and then we don't have to go to court. We can just deal it with that. Daniel Smith has said, well, democracy lies in the legislatures. That's not really the case. Even Plato and the ancient Athenians said tyranny of the majority was one of the things they feared. 51% can laud it over the 49, and they can dictate things to them. Then that's not democratic. So we get constitutions in order to balance that aspect off. And that gives that 49% at least some minimal rights, no matter what the majority determines.
Rob Smith was reelected, I believe, as the president of the UCP, and several of the things that the more right flank of the party wanted, those people that supported that also, I think, did not take control of the UCP board. So do you see anything changing, really, in the next 2 years before we go to the votes again?
Well, I don't think within the party there'll be much of a change. One of the aspects, of course, is when you go to an election, that party base is really important for your ground game. And if they are only lukewarm about you because you haven't decided, sovereignty within a united Canada is not what they're looking for, then will there be the party support for it? Because, they have a large number of members, and they're influential members, and they're in a position. But if when you're going and door knocking, all you want to talk about is independence, and it's really not a party platform, you're going to have a contradiction that's going to be difficult to run with.
Mark Carney lost someone from his cabinet, Stéphane Guilbeault. As soon as that memorandum on the pipeline was signed, he stepped away. Yeah. He has been an activist for the environmental movement. Does that hurt the Liberal government?
Absolutely, yeah. Guilbeault, of course, he was the Quebec lieutenant as well, so he actually has a lot of respect for him in Quebec. He's seen as their minister, sort of thing, representing the government. And this is an affront to Quebec that they would harm the future. Now, the Conservatives aren't going to make any inroads in Quebec. They just don't like Poilievre. They have, I think, under Harper, they were able to get like a maximum of 12 seats in Quebec or something like that. So they've never really been able to break that barrier there. But the Bloc Québécois, on the other hand, is still surging, and that could be where the damage to the Liberals come. They still need enormous support in Quebec in order to make them, even a minority government as they have now. But if they want to make a majority government, they've got to watch that. And, of course, here we have BC, 20 MPs in BC, and if they've irritated those 20 too much, then there's another threat that might go. And we talked a little bit about the NDP being on the down, but that's where the NDP would gain some potential growth, is by taking over some of the Liberals that are disaffected and say, that enough is enough.
Jack Layton was strong in Quebec in 2015, I believe, when they formed the official opposition, but the NDP are in a bit of a conundrum right now. They had a leaders debate, the 5 candidates in Montreal. It was supposed to be French language, and their French language skills were not where they probably should be.
And, ironically, like Layton was not exactly bilingual himself either, but there was something that the Quebecers liked about Jack. And 60 seats, I think, is what they gained at one point in Quebec. And it was like an anomaly for whatever reason, but he had won their hearts to the extent that they were willing to go with him. And, there were some MPs who ran for the NDP in Quebec, didn't even campaign. The one famous lady was in Las Vegas during the entire time and came back and realized she was now the member of parliament for her community, and she was not bilingual either, etc. So the language issue can be overlooked in Quebec, but it's not easy for them to do it. There's got to be something else, and Layton, as you say, had a cachet of some sort that just appealed to the Quebecers. They said, this is the guy we want, sort of thing, for this particular time, this moment, sort of thing. And that lightning in a bottle is difficult to replicate twice. Let's face it, the NDP, the minivan party, because they have only 7 members and they can fit in a minivan, it's a very difficult time for them. And no one is covering their leadership race very much, right? It's like it's an also-ran. And it's going to be difficult to see what occurs there.
With the Liberals and Mark Carney, there's another elephant in the room, and that's Donald Trump. Carney apologized in the House of Commons for a flippant remark when he was asked when the last time that he had a conversation with Trump, and he said, "Who cares?" Yeah. Maybe not the best choice of words.
No, as I say, I don't think he's a politician. He's a technocrat, and a lot of times he's said offhanded comments. As soon as he's asked a question, he was asked about Doug Ford, and he made a joke, and it was, instead of saying Doug Ford is a loyal Canadian, a good ally, which he has been for Carney in particular, he made it kind of a mockery of him a little bit. And if he's got a political future, he's going to have to, if the economy bounces back and everything becomes super, then nobody cares. But otherwise, he's got to play all the angles, and flippant remarks is, of course, never going to be good. And, of course, any remark that's made about Trump gets back to Trump. It's just the way it is. Trudeau paid the price when he made some comments, and Trump says, well, I have 12 televisions on Air Force One, and I watched your comments, and you're a backstabber, and so that becomes hard to make up for that.
The Liberals did gain 1 MP from the Conservatives, and there was talk that perhaps there might have been another who he just decided to become an independent, but there might still be some others that might walk across the floor. How does that impact the dynamics of our government?
So there's nothing like polls to drive a politician, of course, and Poilievre, I think his prospects for being prime minister is at like 20% or something, and Carney's still up there at 40 or something. Whereas the party is much more popular than the leader at this time. And people see that, and they observe it, and they obviously are cognizant of it. The best thing for Poilievre is that he has the Western Conservatives somewhat fully support him. But Danielle Smith has got to be just a burr in the saddle for Poilievre. During the election, the things she did and the things she stated, and even she said, at the end, they benched me for the last 2 weeks of the election because of the things I was saying that nobody wanted to hear. And the pivot, the failure for the Conservatives to pivot, get rid of his advisors and change his tone. He tried. I mean, he even appears on CBC occasionally and in discussion, but he's an attack dog. I don't know if he's got another mode, but people don't see that as prime ministerial. They see it as way too confrontational in the general electorate. There is a portion of the Conservative Party that love that, and that's drawn their numbers, and they support him fully. But everyone recognizes that in order for them to become the next government, they need to go beyond that. Although he did increase their numbers, increased in every way, shape, and form, but now it's a bit of a buyer's remorse. And it happens every time for the Conservatives when they lose an election. They look inwardly and they start to consume themselves a little bit, I think.
And Poilievre and the Conservatives have a date coming up in January when his leadership will be under review.
Yeah.
I've heard some say that he'll get 80% approval, but I don't know.
You know, right now there doesn't seem to be a congealed opposition to him. There's the odd, and as you say, a floor crossing and an MP who decides to resign in July, but announces this now, and become weird anomalies there. If more of those start to surface, and there seems to be a general movement, then the bandwagon effect will kick in, I think, and there'll be people saying, yeah, the problem is the leader. And lots of times there's lots of problems within a party, but it's always the leader that has to hold to be held accountable. And of course, the January decision-making just happens to hit right at the time when he's got to do that. And he's had some personal problems as well, of course, with losing his own seat in Ontario and other things of that nature. I don't know if I'd want to say 80% or even a victory, depending, because it's a long time between now and January in politics. A lot of things can happen, too.
Yeah. We have not had a chance to sit down and discuss our new Medicine Hat City Council in action since we last met, November 17th. They received the triannual report on the city's finances, which, in a nutshell, was kind of shocking. We saw some of the aldermen, old term, councillors, councillors actually asking some pretty good questions. What did you take from that first meeting?
There's nothing that focuses attention like when the administration comes forward and says this is an unsustainable process. Your budgets are not going to work anymore and things like. And of course, this is like within weeks of their hitting the ground running. They've gone through the sign-in aspects, and everybody's very proud and happy and everything. And now it's like, okay, now you've got some tough decisions, some tough positions to determine. You've got to really galvanize together. And I think, generally speaking, that the response has been mature, thoughtful, bringing forth, we need more information from the admin. And I think that's been fairly understandable that they would do that. And it also shows responsibility. I didn't see anybody grandstanding at this point and saying, dominating the mic and, we've got to start firing people left, right, and center or anything of that sort of thing. So they seem pretty balanced. One of the things that will occur because of the budget is polarization. We'll see that they start to divide into pockets, I would think, which is human nature and it's natural. We're going to have those who want to push the envelope and try and bring in more services, to bring in more businesses, and those who say we have to be physically responsible first and foremost and get our ducks in a row because we can't keep diving into the reserve funds in order to do that. It's just not going to be sustainable. Many
of them campaigned on a 3-year tax freeze, which now looks pretty hard to keep.
Yes, and it's even with inflation, 2% inflation. I mean, to say that you're going to freeze, it looks great on paper. It looks good when you're trying to win a campaign, but to actually put that in place, even when you want to review and you want to bring in outside people to review, there's a cost and expense there too. And sometimes there's upfront expenses for long-term gain and determinations that how are we going to save $1 million? Well, we have to spend a few thousand in order to determine the best way to save that $1 million. And So I think the reality of the situation kicks in pretty quick with the poor councillors.
It'll be interesting to see the debate over whether or not they proceed with either the Samus solar project or the Southside Recreation Center.
Yeah.
2 pretty big tickets.
Yes, I think the South Side is pie in the sky at this point. When admin comes forward with that information about the budget, it's just nothing. Samus is, on the other hand, the solar power array is really a long-term aspect. And I think there's going to be a determination. Do we spend now for the 20-year gains that we're going to get out of it? Or are we, because we're elected every 4 years, we're going to go with the short term and the quick fix and let's put this on the back burner, let somebody else deal with it, all the hard questions, type of thing. So, and that'll be a bit of a divider, I think, as well. We'll see how that kind of flushes out.
Well, there's never a shortage of things to talk about when Jim Groom comes to the porch.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you very much. It's always interesting to chat with you, for sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.